Imagine, just for a second, waking up tomorrow morning and realizing that your entire world has just completely vanished. The way you make a living, the people who rule over you, even the fundamental ways you've been taught to think about the universe, all of it just changed overnight. The old rules no longer apply, and nobody, absolutely nobody, has a map for this new reality. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're not just looking at some dry, dusty academic subject, we are exploring a desperate, high-stakes rescue mission for human civilization. We're looking at the birth of sociology.
Okay, let's dive into this, because when we look back at history, it's so easy to think of the founding of new sciences as, a bunch of people sitting quietly in dusty libraries pondering abstract thoughts. But the truth, sociology wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a desperate survival mechanism, forged in an era of unprecedented, frankly terrifying chaos. When the very fabric of human existence was tearing apart at the seams, people needed a completely new way to understand what was happening to them, or they risked losing society altogether.
So let's set the stage with Section 1, Chaos and the Old World, and see how this perfect storm actually forms.
To really grasp why this brand new tool had to be invented, we have to travel back to Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. Basically, three massive shockwaves hit humanity in rapid succession, leaving literally no stone unturned. Just look at this stark contrast. For centuries, life was quiet, predictable, and deeply traditional. People lived on feudal farms, governed by the changing of the seasons and absolute religious authority. You were born, you farmed, you obeyed the king and the church, and you died. Simple. But then, the new world comes crashing in. We go from that quiet agrarian life to roaring, chaotic, smoke-filled industrial cities driven by early capitalism, and it was guided not by faith, but by reason and science. The stakes for the average person living through this transition couldn't have been higher. Everything they knew was just gone.
That brings us to Section 2, Science and the Enlightenment. This is what we call the intellectual shock.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this period fundamentally rewired the human brain. For the first time in modern history, logic and scientific observation began to actively replace blind religious faith as the ultimate source of truth. And we can see this mental revolution perfectly through two specific tools, the telescope and the study of human anatomy. Instead of just looking to ancient texts to understand the heavens, early scientists looked up and observed the actual movement of planets. Instead of accepting traditional teachings on the human body, pioneers literally cut into it to see how the machinery worked. These tools forced people to observe the real physical world. The ultimate authority was no longer a priest, it was your own two eyes.
And this brings us to a foundational concept, empiricism. This is the theory that all knowledge is derived from sense experience and observable evidence. Think of it like this. It wasn't just a new word, it was a brand new operating system for society. Empiricism totally revolutionized how we determined what was true and what was false. Basically, if you couldn't prove it with evidence, it didn't hold weight. No way. You can imagine how deeply threatening this was to the established powers of the old world.
Which leads us right into Section 3, the French Revolution, the political shock.
So, that intellectual awakening, it paved the way for violent political upheaval. Because if the old rules about science and the heavens were wrong, well, maybe the old rules about who gets to rule over the masses were wrong too. The ruling class, who everyone previously thought to be divinely appointed, could actually be overthrown. The storming of the Bastille wasn't some peaceful transition of power. It was the visceral, gritty, bloody reality of the French Revolution. The absolute monarchy, a system that had held European society together for centuries, was violently dismantled. And the sudden lack of a king didn't just bring freedom, it created terrifying political chaos. The traditional hierarchy was shattered, leaving this desperate, bleeding vacuum where social order used to be.
The rallying cry of this era was liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, these are beautiful, highly idealized words, right? But when we contrast these lofty ideals with the resulting bloodshed and the reign of terror that followed, a terrifying truth emerges. The traditional answers had failed entirely. Sure, but the new answers? They were tearing society apart. The people had successfully destroyed the old political system, but they didn't yet know how to build a stable new one. And as if that wasn't enough, we get to Section 4, the Industrial Revolution, the massive economic shock. While people's minds and governments were radically altering, a third shockwave just crushed traditional agrarian life. Let's methodically walk through the grim steps of this economic transition. Step 1. For generations, families worked together in home-based agrarian production, weaving textiles or farming at their own pace. Step 2. The invention of massive, steam-powered, mass-producing machines made those home-based skills entirely obsolete, practically overnight. Which leads to step 3, forced migration. Everyday people were ripped from their traditional rural homes and thrust into the loud, dangerous, and utterly alien environment of the urban factory system. They didn't choose this for fun. Survival literally demanded it.
So the crucial point is that this forced migration birthed incredibly harsh new realities. We're talking about long, grueling hours tending to dangerous machinery. This led to unprecedented urban squalor as millions crammed into cities that had absolutely no infrastructure to support them. We see deep, grinding poverty right alongside massive new wealth, which sparked rising class conflict. And perhaps most devastatingly, we see the breakdown of the traditional family unit as fathers, mothers, and even young children were sent to different factories just to make enough money to eat. These unprecedented social problems deeply, deeply terrified early thinkers. Society seemed to be quite literally eating itself alive.
And these weren't just abstract ideas discussed in parlors. They were grim, visceral realities. Skies were black with unchecked factory smoke, and rivers were choked with toxic waste. Then there was the heartbreaking reality of child poverty, with young kids working barefoot in incredibly hazardous conditions. To the people living through it, this breakdown of society truly felt like the end of the world. They had lost their farms, their kings, and their quiet lives, only to inherit soot, disease, and exploitation.
So how did we survive it? That brings us to Section 5, the birth of sociology, forging a new tool.
The compounding domino effect of these 3 massive revolutions, the intellectual, the political, and the economics, basically forced humanity into a corner. They had a broken society, and no traditional tools could fix it. They needed a new science. They needed a way to study human behavior and social structures with the exact same rigor they were applying to physics or chemistry. Enter Auguste Comte. Living right in the tumultuous wake of the French Revolution, he looked around at all this chaos and had a profoundly radical idea. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't just a radical idea, it was a lifeline. He realized that if we can use the scientific method to understand the laws of physics and chemistry, why on earth can't we use it to discover the underlying laws of society? So he coined the term sociology, the scientific study of society. His goal wasn't just to passively observe, his goal was to actively diagnose society's ills and find a cure to bring order back to the chaos. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole shebang. The formula that changed the world was actually quite simple, but profound. You take the rigorous, empirical, scientific method that we learned during the Enlightenment, you apply it directly to the massive social problems created by the political and industrial revolutions, and the result? Sociology. It was the ultimate survival tool, a brand new lens forged out of the ashes of the old world, designed specifically to navigate the incredibly complex new world that humanity had blindly stumbled into.
Which brings us right back to today. You know, the world of the 19th century may feel pretty distant, but think about the massive shockwaves hitting our own society right now. Rapidly advancing artificial intelligence, changing how we work, massive global political shifts, algorithms rewiring how we communicate. Our world is turning upside down once again. The chaotic storm hasn't vanished, it's just changed shape. So the big question I want to leave you with is this. As we face our own modern revolutions, how will we use the tools of sociology, tools literally forged in the fires of survival to make sense of our world today? Because understanding where this science came from is the very first step in realizing just how much we still need it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.